welcome you to another episode of Marriages of the Kingdom with Adrian and Nicole. We are broadcasters with WYTV7 Christian Broadcasters Network, and we are excited that you have connected with us today because you know the importance of having a strong foundation as an individual and as a couple. We invite you to sow into the ministry by going to our website, which is WYTV7.org. Again, that is WYTV7.org. And your donations are greatly appreciated. Our ministry, Marriages of the Kingdom, is about strengthening and preparing individuals for marriage, as well as building and restoring marriages. If you would like to be a guest on our broadcast, please reach out to us and contact us on our website, which is www.marriagesofthekingdom.com, or you can also contact us at WYTV7.org as well. If you're struggling with your marriage and you are on the verge of giving up, we ask that you please get help because you can restore your marriage. And we're continuing on this month, giving you tools and giving everyone tools to help salvage their marriage, because you don't have to give up on your marriage. That's an option. And we're here to tell you that that's an option, not your only solution and not your only choice.
Right.
We do offer premarital and marital counseling for those that live outside our area. We offer virtual counseling now as well. So if you are in the upstate of South Carolina area, you can connect with us for face-to-face counseling, or if you're in another state or in other parts of South Carolina, we do offer virtual counseling as well. So there are tools and there is hope to rebuild your marriage. And we thank you all for being with us, and we pray that you enjoy the message that God has given us for couples today. We pray that you realize that there is hope for your marriage. And we want to discuss today how pride can prevent you from having a healthy marriage, as well as contribute to divorce. Our mission is to make sure that we share everything that God has given to us. Through our experiences before being divorced previously, and through revelation from God, He has allowed us a platform to help prevent divorce, to help salvage marriages, and also to help build healthier marriages. All of our marriages can always get better, so there's always room for improvement, and we never want to stop just where we are. We do not know that you cannot be married by yourself. We know you can't be married by yourself. But for some of those, if you are willing to put in the work, you can save your marriage. And you can have a healthy and a long-lasting marriage as well. And so salvaging your marriage is all about being willing to put in the work, to trust God with your marriage and moving from there. And then there are times where you have to seek outside assistance. There are times where you do need a third party to help you get to a place of healthiness and to help you get to a place where you can have a healthy and meaningful conversation with your spouse. So if you're watching this broadcast, that says that you want everything that God has for your marriage, and you want everything that God has ordained for your marriage. And that says also that you do not have a problem with doing the work that it takes. So let's talk about pride in marriage today.
Yes, let's talk about pride. First of all, you have to understand that pride kills relationships. Pride kills relationships. It creates a wedge between the two people by destroying intimacy. It breaks down trust, and it also prevents peace between the husband and the wife. So pride is very toxic to a marriage.
And Adrian, he just said pride is very toxic to a marriage. And as we all know, toxins poison.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have pride within yourself, which enters your marriage, now you're poisoning your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we have to be able to identify pride early on.
That's very good. Only healthy couples can recognize the earliest appearance of pride and do everything in their power to remove it from themselves and their marriage. So you do have the power to remove it. You have to recognize, first of all, recognize where it is, where it's coming from. And then you have the power. You have the power to remove that pride from your own life as well as from your marriage. All right, so let's take a look at a few signs of pride. Number one, everything is personal. When you have an attitude of everything is personal, that means pride is an elevated view of self. In other words, you're selfish. So we can't be thinking and always thinking that things are about us, and we can't be selfish in our marriages. So when pride enters an individual, everything becomes about them. So every opposing idea or differing viewpoint isn't seen as a natural disagreement or difference of perspective. It then becomes a personal attack on whoever's holding on to the pride. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, like you were saying, pride is an elevated view of ourselves. And so when pride comes in, now we're saying everything is about us. And so when we think that everything is about us, now it's very difficult for one spouse to hear the viewpoint of another spouse, because you assume that everything is about you. And then everything that your spouse communicates with you, when you are a prideful person, you assume that it's a personal attack because you think everything is about you. And so it's not about your spouse can't speak to you about a situation because you view it as a personal attack when it's not a personal attack. It is perfectly healthy to have disagreements in marriage. It's only when one is prideful that they assume that their spouse is attacking them, as opposed to looking at it from a viewpoint of saying, okay, maybe this is something that I need to work on, I need to adjust.
Absolutely. And the person who is prideful or full of pride, their response to every situation is going to be one of a defensive mechanism. They're going to become defensive because now they feel as if they're being assaulted. They feel as if they're being attacked. Even if you simply disagree over the most minor issues. If you have a problem with I'm not even talking about huge dilemmas. We're just talking about the minor basic issues. Even if you have those, that will turn, the person who has pride, that will turn something very small into something very large. So we got to learn how not to be selfish. Okay. Also, pride is fault finding. It's fault finding because pride requires us to look better than others. A pride-filled person becomes an expert at finding fault in other people. So once you have this fault-finding type of pride, now you look at everybody else as if they're beneath you, and you have a problem and you find fault in other people. It's as though they have fault-finding glasses, and once they view life through those lenses, problems and issues are all that they see, except it is with your spouse instead of with yourself. Instead of taking a look at the mirror and looking at yourself, now you're always looking at your spouse and thinking that something's wrong with them, or they have the issue, or they have the problem.
And people that are fault finders, like Adrian just stated, problems and issues are natural for them. That's norm for them because that's what they do. They find fault in others as opposed to looking at themselves. And so, like I stated, that becomes a norm, which is very unhealthy. Because we should not always be looking at our spouse or any other people or family members or whoever it is, looking for issues, looking for a wrong in them. But when people are full of pride, they are always looking to see what's wrong with someone else as opposed to looking at themselves. We always say when you have times where there's couples, spouses that have been married multiple times, And sometimes they don't get set free from themselves. And so the way that they look at the situation is something was wrong with the other 2, 3, or 4, or 5 relationships they were in. Something was wrong with those people, as opposed to looking at themselves and saying, okay, I was a common denominator in those relationships, so maybe I need to look at myself. But when you're prideful, the issue is everybody else instead of you.
That's very good. Very good. So now let's look at it. If we're always looking at it through those fault-finding glasses, we already know that's not of God. It's not of God. God never required us to point out and fix what is wrong with our spouses. We can be concerned. However, we can only create change within ourselves. So I think that's very key. We have to create change within ourselves. Instead of always looking at your spouse, trying to fault find and find something wrong with them, turn the attention and focus on yourself and think, hey, maybe something's wrong with me. And when you can't look at yourself, go to God. He'll help you look at yourself in a more clear manner. All right. So the refusal to be influenced by your spouse. This is another sign of pride. Refusal to be influenced by your spouse. Now, humility opens us up to change, while pride keeps us locked into our current state. The humility opens us up for change. So we have to humble ourselves.
Like Adrian just stated, we have to humble ourselves because with pride will keep you in a state of denial. And that state of denial is you're repeating the same things over and over and over. And that's the reason some people apologize for the same things over and over and over. Because of the pride, it's never their intent to change. Because when people are prideful, they really honestly don't think anything is wrong with them. And so now they're apologizing for the same things over and over and over because they have never made an attempt to change who they are and to change the situation. And so it's very important in our marriages that that's not us, that we have to make sure that, in our marriages, we're not, it gets to a place if you're prideful and you're apologizing for the same thing over and over and over, your spouse has tuned you out from that because they realize that there is no change that's taking place. So we have to make sure that when we say we're sorry, that now we are following that up with whatever is needed so that we don't do that act again to offend our spouse. So that's very important.
That's very good. Very good. We have to always make sure that we're doing the things that we have to do to show that respect to our spouses. And first and foremost, the common denominator is when you respect yourself. When you respect yourself, it's easier to respect your spouse. It's easier to respect other people when you first respect yourself.
When a person is unable to positively be influenced by their spouse, that's a problem. Your spouse should be able to communicate something with you and have some type of influence in your life, because if they don't, that's a sign that something is terribly wrong in your marriage. If you have some influence over your spouse, I should be able to tell my husband, honey, that was off, that was out of order, maybe you shouldn't have done or said that. And my husband responds with, yes, you're right. I need to work on that. It shouldn't be a defense mechanism where it's, well, no, I don't know what you're talking about. That's where there's a problem. And that's a sense of pride when nobody can tell you anything. And it's a very quick way to break down a marriage. Absolutely. When we think that we're better than our spouse, we stop being influenced by them. So you can never be in a marriage and think that you are better than your spouse, right, and think that you bring more to the table than your spouse. Because as we all know, marriage is not 50-50. Right. It should be 100-100 on both ends. However, there's times where one spouse or the other may be going through something, and they may not be putting their 100% in. But us as spouses and us loving our spouses, that's why God connected us. We should be able to make up the slack when our spouse is weak. That's what marriage is about. It's not about your spouse has to meet you where you are, because in actuality, no two people are operating the same at the same time. So that's not actual. That actually will never take place in marriage. And we have to understand that. Another thing is there is an ignorance of the need of others. When you are prideful, you don't realize that you actually need other people. Pride doesn't just keep us from caring for our family members, it prevents us from even seeing their need in our life. And I want to stop right here for a moment. I need everybody to realize that you need your husband. If you're a wife, husbands, you need your wife. You need each other. The husband and the wife balance each other off. When pride kicks in, now you think that, oh, I don't need my spouse. I was doing fine before I met my spouse. Pride, that's pride. That's pride for thinking. That's pride for talk. And you know, a lot of times we hear spouses, they will say things like that to each other. Well, I really don't need them. Well, it's not about that you need them. It's about the fact that God connected you two together, and because he connected you, that there's a purpose and a destiny for both of you together. But pride will come in and have you thinking that, no, you don't need your spouse, and that's not true.
That's very good. And you go back and you mentioned something about God, and I want to go back there again, because most marriages think that it's just between two people, a husband and a wife. It isn't. It's between a husband, a wife, and God. And so that pride, again, pride will kick in as soon as we start to focus on ourselves. It will also kick in if we just begin to focus on our spouse. In other words, we cannot leave God out of the equation in our marriages. This has to be all three. And if we keep God in the middle of it, then that way we push down pride and keep pride out of our marriages.
And again, like I was stating, we have to realize, couples, that we need each other. You know, there's times, like I said, where we get to a place where the enemy comes in and has you thinking that you don't need each other, but you actually do need each other. And I need my husband. I don't know about anybody else, but I need my husband. And not only do I need my husband, I want my husband as well. That is very important for us to understand that we do need each other. And like I said, we shouldn't just need each other, you should want each other. That's so important. When pride kicks in, you don't even know the need of your spouse. You don't recognize the need of your spouse because you think it's all about you. A prideful person will never consider how they can assist their spouse because they're thinking about themselves all the time. They will never think about, okay, what can I do to make my spouse life better? We all should wake up every day asking God, what is it that I can do to improve the life of my spouse, not myself? Because if we focus on our spouse, God is going to take care of us. And if our spouse is focusing on us, now you have a husband and a wife who are giving out the same thing to each other, and they're receiving the same thing. And now you have a healthy marriage because of that. And then another thing that is prideful and shows a lot of pride is for those that have addiction to attention. If you have an addiction to attention, you are very needy, and it's a sign of pride. Because when people are prideful, they're needy. Again, like we've been saying, we think everything is about us. And what marriage can function on, I need you to meet all of my needs, but I'm going to do very little for you. What marriage can function like that? What marriage can be healthy like that? Who wants a marriage like that?
Right.
That's why it's very important for us to stay in the presence of God and pray and study the word, not only by ourselves, but with our spouse, so that we can recognize these different signs of pride when they come up into our marriage. Wisdom will give you the ability to recognize. Communication with God through prayer will give you the ability to recognize when pride kicks in.
Yes, that addiction to attention, we get to the place to where everything becomes about what we think. Everything becomes about what we want. Everything becomes about what we desire and how these situations will impact us. Even if our spouse tragically breaks their leg, a prideful spouse immediately thinks about how that will inconvenience them and not focus on the spouse at all. They again will turn their attention to themselves and start thinking, okay, well, now I have extra stuff. Now I have extra duties. Now I have other things that I have to get done. This is an inconvenience for me because you broke your leg.
And that happens. We talk to couples with different situations to where, can you imagine how your spouse would feel if you're in a predicament where you're sick or something is going on and your spouse still expects you to cook? We've seen situations like that where the spouse is really physically cannot do what they normally would do. However, their spouse has a problem with that. Can you imagine the feeling that that spouse has because they're sick? Well, I want to cook for you, but I can't. As a husband or a wife, what we should do is kick in at that point and realize, okay, it's not about us. Let me do what I can do to help my spouse. Okay, maybe you don't know how to cook and your wife normally cooks or your husband normally cooks. It shouldn't be a situation where you're irritated and agitated and upset at your spouse. You know, McDonald's is always open 24/7. Burger King, there's a restaurant that is always open. But your first priority should always be making sure your spouse is taken care of and not yourself. That's very important. And another situation that shows that there's pride in a marriage is a refusal to submit to authority. I wanted to discuss this here as a woman because a lot of times for women, when we have been alone for periods of time, went through divorce, went through different relationships, and we have been functioning independently, now there is a refusal to submit to authority. There's a refusal to submit to the authority of God. Not to, okay, that doesn't mean I have to do everything my husband says to do, but as a Christian couple, as a married couple, if you are a Christian couple that is married, that's watching us, the word of God requires us to be submissive as a woman to our husband as he submits to Christ. There's two-part. That is two-part. However, if your husband does not submit to Christ, that does not give you the authority to take the head and to lead the household, because God never gave that to us. And that's a sense of pride, because it's easy for a woman who has been by herself for a period of time and doing things herself, even if she's in a marriage where her husband appears to be more submissive or more laid back, then she will think that she's in charge of things at times. And that's not the case. That's not the order that God has laid before us. And so we have to make sure that we don't start to operate in that, because you can do things a little better and or figure some things out does not make you the man of the house. And so it's very important for us to understand that it is walking in pride.
So we have to understand that we have to submit to authority. Even as the husband, you still have to submit to authority. That authority is Christ the King. So we have to submit to his authority. And we need to love our spouses, as the word says. We have to love our wives, men, as Christ loved the church. So we have to put into that into effect as well.
That's true. That is true. And in marriage, talking about submitting to authority, in marriage, an arrogant person will not humble themselves to wise counsel. A prideful, arrogant person would never humble themselves to wise counsel or do what is required to improve their marriage, because in actuality, they think that they're not the problem. So why do I have to go to counseling? Why do I need to do this? That's a sign of pride. That's a sign of arrogance. And so even when prideful people attend counseling, what they'll do is they'll simply go to validate their point. They'll go for a purpose of, let me go to explain, I need somebody else to explain to my spouse how wrong they are. That's why prideful people go to counseling. That's why arrogant people get counseling. Counseling, marital counseling or premarital counseling, is not for the purposes of exposing what's wrong with your spouse. It's for purposes of exposing what's going on with you, what your issues are as an individual, so that you can work on yourself and your spouse can work on themselves. The purpose of counseling is not to identify what's wrong with the other person. In counseling, if there is an issue, counseling brings out what a person already knows. It just helps them to come to a realization of what that is and gives them the tools to work on whatever that is. But counseling is not for purposes of pointing fingers. That's what prideful people do. And it is a very quick way to break down a marriage.
Also, pride is one who shows an inability to see opposing viewpoints. Pride causes us to crown our way of thinking as king. We'll crown ourselves as king. Anyone who sees the world differently is viewed as wrong. It may begin with an outsider to the marriage, but it will quickly include your spouse. So a prideful person has issues with others disagreeing with them. So we have to make sure that we don't let pride come in, so that we're not thinking that now we are the king of all thinking and we're the king of all being, or the queen of all being. So now we have to make sure that we don't allow that pride to come in.
Let's talk about for a minute, prideful people having issues with other people disagreeing with them. How does that work when you're communicating with someone and that person gets agitated or irritated because your thought is not their thought? How difficult is that to communicate with that type of person?
It'll be very difficult when someone thinking with pride. So once their pride kicks in, they're not thinking about their spouse, God, or anybody else. Now they're thinking only about themselves.
Exactly. Prideful people, they're never asking for help.
Never asking for help. They're always expecting service, always expecting someone to give to them, but they're never willing to go out of their way to do something for someone else, meaning your spouse. It's an odd combination, but pride weds the two. When we overvalue ourselves, we refuse to ask others for help. So we have to not overvalue ourselves. If we go back to the word talks about that. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to. It's saying the same thing. But the prideful person will see this as a weakness. But at the same time, we regularly expect other people to serve us because we think we are due their sacrifices. So a man filled with pride will ask his wife for nothing, but expect her to do everything.
Let's break that down. A man filled with pride will ask his wife for nothing, but expect her to do everything. And Adrian mentioned earlier about you're the king, or you could be the king or the queen in your own eyes. So a prideful person will not ask their spouse for help, but in their mind, because they think they're the king or queen, you should know how to serve me. You should know what I like to eat. You should know that I like my bath water ran when I get home. You should know this. You should know that. That's pride for thinking. That's what that is. we can't read each other's minds. But when you're prideful, you think everybody is supposed to march to the beat of your drum. And we're bringing all of this to the couple's attention, and even those that are single that are watching. We're bringing this to your attention, not to identify what's wrong with you, to say, okay, oh Lord, oh God, I do that, I say that, I act like that. The purposes of bringing that to your attention is not for you to feel bad, but for all of us to recognize early, because like we started out initially, we said healthy couples recognize when pride is coming up. This is for the purposes of identifying pride as being one of the reasons that can break down your marriage, because you're not willing to bend, because you know you're wrong, but you refuse to say you're wrong. You refuse to say that you have played a part in the breakdown of the marriage. And so that's why we're bringing it to the forefront, so that we can recognize it and we can nip it in the bud.
Pride also brings about an absence of sacrifice and submission. Pride says that we deserve to do our own thing and go our own way. That's what pride says. Marriage demands that we sacrifice our individual dreams and desires for the sake of the relationship. It requires us to submit our wills to one another in order for the union to flourish. Pride convinces us that sacrifice is below us and submission is unnecessary. Let me say that again. Pride convinces us that sacrifice is below us and submission is unnecessary.
And I want to go back here to the statement that we just made about marriage demands that we sacrifice our individual dreams and desires for the sake of the relationship. We don't want you to get confused with thinking that that means you're supposed to put your life on hold, and not walk in your purpose, because we all have a purpose and had a purpose when God brought us into this world, when we entered into this world. And so that does not mean that you put your life on hold because you're now married. What that means is, once you're married, now my dream is my husband's dream. His dream is my dream. And we work together to walk in purpose as God has ordained us to. And so that doesn't mean that, okay, you get married and, okay, I'm married now and I got to sacrifice my life and just, stay at home and, have babies and do whatever because I'm married now. That's not what that means. So we don't want to get that confused. When you are connected through purpose, when you both have wisdom and seek God, your different desires and the purposes that God has placed in your life, they will gel together. They will work together. There will not be confusion in that because God is in it. And so we have to keep that in mind. That does not mean that you lose yourself as an individual as well.
Pride also says, I will not say that I'm sorry. Another way to say that is a refusal to say I'm sorry. I refuse to say I'm sorry. That's what pride says. The inability to apologize can appear for two reasons. First, a prideful person may not be able to see that they are wrong. Second, a prideful person might not be willing to admit fault, even when they know it is their own fault. Either way, the words, I'm sorry, are never heard, or if they are quickly followed up by, but you. Yeah, pride may say, I'm sorry, but it'll follow the words up with, but you.
Yes.
Now it's taking responsibility and ownership off of the prideful person. Again, trying to place it on someone else. A prideful spouse will always point the finger back at their spouse.
And how does that feel, or how do you think that feels when you're trying to have a conversation with your spouse about an issue, and when they're prideful, like Adrian just said, they come back with, well, I did that because you did this. but you did this, but you said that, but you went there. As prideful people communicate with you based on the fact that all of your actions cause me to act a certain way. That's what pride is. Because I did one thing, so now my husband is, well, I did that because you did that. That's what pride is. Pride will never point the finger back at oneself. Pride is always pointing at somebody else. And we have to make sure that that's not us in our marriages, because what marriage can withstand the pressure and the agony of is you consistently, and that I never play a part in anything. What marriage can withstand that? No marriages can. And so we all have fault in marriage. We all have issues in marriage. Our focus should be working on our own issues and not someone else's issues. And again, we thank you for tuning in with us for another episode of Marriages of the Kingdom with Adrian and Nicole. And we invite you to connect with us at WYTV7.org or www.marriagesofthekingdom.com. Until next time, please be intentional about your marriage.